This is The Big Idea. I'm Donny Deutsch. Tonight, enough is enough. We're getting ripped off, beat up, and smoked out, and we don't even know it. America's top investigative reporters are here with their undercover stings, all caught on tape. Up first, what kind of cold criminal would attack a cancer patient when he's on his deathbed? Here's a story of how you could be robbed when you were just trying to get well. Correspondent Josh Mankiewicz reported on this story for NBC Dateline. Josh, welcome. Your story is about as tragic as it gets, a man who's been given 5 days to live, and at the same time his identity is stolen from him.
Yeah, it's a pretty sad story. What's interesting about it is it's both a sad story and a kind of an uplifting story. You know, Eric Drew was a young man with a good job, a great future, or so it appeared, and then out of nowhere he got this diagnosis that he was seriously ill. And the only reason he got the diagnosis was because he was lucky. He used to give blood regularly. He did this for years, and one day he donated blood out of the goodness of his heart, and the people who took the blood tested it and said, there's something wrong with it, you should go see your doctor. It felt like the flu, but it wasn't. Eric's doctor was as puzzled as his patient and sent him to a specialist. The diagnosis couldn't have been more frightening. A rare and deadly form of the blood cancer, leukemia. It was rapidly shutting down his body.
It was a direct hit to your heart, to your solar plexus, to your way of life. My baby is dying.
Maybe it was a karmic refund for all those blood donations that Eric found out in literally the nick of time, giving him a chance to survive. What would follow would be a painful 2-year ordeal of chemo, radiation, and untried treatments. He'd find himself fighting not only for his life, but in an odd twist, for his good name as well. By the end of January 2003, Eric was hanging on, but so was his cancer. For the next year, he'd find himself in 3 cities, calling a series of hospital beds home. His early warning had given him time to slow his illness, but despite that, he still had the disease that was threatening to kill him. Eric began to look for a bone marrow donor, perhaps his only chance for survival. He was adopted, so his parents and siblings didn't match up genetically. There was no bone marrow match for him. He had no choice but to try an experimental treatment offered by doctors at the Seattle Cancer Care Alliance. There, he'd get a bone marrow transplant, using marrow that only matched up genetically with his own by half. Eric was told there was only a small chance he would even live, but he again went through painful radiation and chemo to prepare his body for this risky treatment. And then something strange happened. Eric began to receive some unexpected attention. Before he'd moved to Seattle, he'd pared down his finances and closed a number of credit card accounts. Now, suddenly, there were new accounts. It made no sense. January 2004, months after arriving in Seattle for treatment, Eric was just barely well enough to sit up in bed and look at the mail that had been piling up. There were now even more fraudulent accounts. It wasn't an accident. It was identity theft, committed against a man who was already at his weakest and most vulnerable. As Eric's life seemed to be slipping away, someone somewhere out there was stealing what little he had left, and by then had rung up more than $10,000 in fraudulent charges. Even though the companies had contacted Eric to confirm the new accounts, most wouldn't cancel the cards without a signed document proving that the real Eric Drew was really Eric Drew. It was something the fake Eric Drew never had to do. Now, out of his so-called transplant coma, Eric sent in those forms. He also called every law enforcement agency he could think of, the local police, the FBI, even the Federal Trade Commission. Eric says law enforcement told him his case was too small to chase down. And it is true that with some $52 billion of identity theft each year in this country, one person who's been hit for 10 grand can't be a priority. But Eric couldn't let it go, couldn't deal with it later. He didn't know if there would be a later. His first move, getting a copy of his own credit report, where this newly minted detective found his first lead, an address for the fake Eric Drew in southeast Seattle, the home of a woman named Gibson. It was a name that meant nothing to Eric, but even as sick as he was, it spurred him on and out of that hospital bed. Then he turned the tables on the thief who had stolen his good name. Eric filed a change of address with the post office for the fake Eric Drew, so the fake Eric's mail would now come to the real Eric's mailbox. He was getting closer, learning where the fake Eric shopped and what he bought. But really, how much detective work can a man sick with cancer do? With law enforcement ignoring it, and his doctors and family telling Eric to ignore everything but his cancer, Eric decided to turn to the public. He put out a press release. Luckily for Eric, it was a slow news day when that press release landed on the desk of reporter Chris Daniels at King 5, the NBC affiliate in Seattle.